Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today. What type of masculinity do boys feel like they're being sold in today's society?
Great question to get us started. I think there is obviously a number of different models of masculinity that young men and boys are sold, if you like, whether that is their peers, their partners, their parents, online spaces. I feel like a lot of those ideas of masculinity are very conventional and quite traditional. Things like success, things like wealth, things like popularity, things like attaining and maintaining respect from those people who you spend your time with. And I think sometimes that can get in the way of individual boys finding their true identity because they're too busy being focused on a version of themselves that they believe that other people want to see.
Yeah, I think the narrative that's been kind of like pushed out there over the last few years, which is like that toxic masculinity tagline, which I don't like. And I think that narrative isn't just wrong, I think it's harmful. And I think it is actually pushing young lads the opposite direction a little bit, isn't it? To what we actually want.
I
What
agree. I think there's a whole conversation to be had around that very term toxic masculinity. I think there is a place for it, but I also think that it is quite inherently unhealthy because the amount of boys who often will roll their eyes at the very mention of, I think, three terms. If I say, for example, in the work that I do, I might do a healthy masculinity assembly and sort of bring about a few ideas about what it is to be male in 2025 in an assembly setting. And the terms toxic masculinity, misogyny, and feminism are often the three terms or words which you can visibly sense and see the atmosphere in the room change, and you visibly see the eyes roll. And whereas these are phrases and they are aspects of being human which we need to discuss, I think that language in itself is often detaches boys from being able to engage with those conversations. And I think that I tend to try and go for healthy or unhealthy masculinity. I know many other educators would even find an issue with that, but I believe it tends to work in terms of getting boys on board to just start this conversation about what it is to be male today.
I think in some ways it's probably been more a case of people have utilised that terminology, as it were, in a negative way or in a response to something negative, and therefore it has just carried that negative connotation the whole way through. And what could have actually been something that could have sparked a positive difference, like a lot of things, when it's pushed around on social media a lot, it can become very, very negative in itself. And so when you say that with a lot of young lads, they roll their eyes. Do you find that it just shuts them off completely if someone mentions that kind of terminology?
I think that you've taken a few step backs in engaging them before you've taken a single step forward, and I think the amount of times where I walk into a room and a teacher has almost expressed out loud, "We're going to here's Benny's going to talk with you today. I'll do a workshop about toxic masculinity," and it's almost like immediately they're being told, "You're male, therefore you're bad. Let's talk about how we can make you a little bit less bad." And
Mm.
and how why would anyone want to engage with that in an empowering, positive, encouraging way? And that is what I think. That's how we need to approach this and address this, because we want to empower boys to be the best version of themselves and to be proud of being male. So let's talk about that aspect of it as well as those negative traits which can from time to time creep in, and let's talk about both sides of that. But let's try and start off positively because we're human, and it's good to start off from an empowering side of this conversation.
So that being the case, if you were to arrive at a school, firstly, how would you like to be introduced by the teachers to the students, and then how do you engage within the first 2 to 3 minutes with the young lads?
Couple of really good questions there. I just think this. I'm Ben, and the very fact that my very very small organisation is called Worth Educating is because I see boys, and I see any young person of any gender, but primarily boys in the work that I do. I want them to see worth and value in themselves. So that's what I want to talk about with them. What makes a dint in that worth being a positive thing? What messages are you getting about what it is to be a boy? And if you think a little bit more about those, are they traits, attributes, characteristics which are harmful to you, or are they ways in which you can express yourself from a place of authenticity and wanting to build a legacy of who you are as a person in terms of the mark you can make on the world. And I think, to answer your other question, how do I engage them immediately? A question that I might often ask is, I will ask them, what scares you? I'm here to talk about what it is to be male in 2025. Before we go any further, can you all either talk in small groups or write down on a post-it note what it is that scares you? And the reason that I do that is because I think it's really, really, it's not a question that you often get asked in school. I think it's really, it's almost a little experiment that I try, because I make a prediction which I will often say out loud to the boys in that room and say, once I've asked that question, I'm going to guess that people have either written down a joke, they've written down something that they think will make the friends chuckle a little bit, or they've written down a trivial version of something which is actually a really, really hidden version of the things that they're actually scared of. And I'm nearly always right. I always say I'd love to be proved wrong in this. And sometimes boys will write the fear of failure, the fear of being ill, the fear of having poor mental health, the fear of getting injured, not being able to do the sport that I love, the fear of being rejected by girls. They're the conversations I want to have. But often it's a lot more trivial than that, because it is not acceptable still today, even though we're talking about mental health on a much more positive level now, for boys to be scared and afraid and to open up about what those fears are. And that's what I'm interested in.
So would you say there is a link between the way masculinity is seen today in young people and mental health? Is it a defining feature in basically what is causing negative mental health with them?
I believe so. And I think much of the time boys are on board, and a lot of these influences that they follow online, obviously a lot of those messages are very harmful. They are very toxic spaces. But there is a reason often why these boys go to these individuals who have something to sell them about what it is to be male, and often they're very positive things to start off with, like motivation, health and fitness, aspirations. Often that is centered around mental health as well, and boys are generally a lot more open to that. Yet I often find myself in a room and I will ask boys, why do you think that 3/4 of you have found it difficult to tell me what you are afraid of? And at that point, interestingly, they're often extremely open and saying, well, because it's not cool to do that, is it? It's not accepted. I'll get laughed at. A boy said to me in a workshop late last year, 2024, and this is quite commonplace. This is quite a regular version of this would usually take place. And the exact quote was, if you expose yourself, or if you break down in front of your friends, you're finished. So even though we almost seem to be convincing ourselves that we're in a much healthier place around talking about mental health, and I think there are aspects of that which are absolutely true, there's still a huge barrier there for boys. And I think if they are therefore not able to open up about what they're going through, and they're putting on this, this stoic, tough exterior, then naturally the two go hand in hand, and they're going to maybe act up. They're maybe going to deal with those emotions through anger, through aggression, and they're not just going to simply be able to open up to their friends and tell them how they're doing. And I think good friendships, empowerment, feeling good about yourself, self-esteem, self-worth, all comes from just having friends around you who you can absolutely be open and honest with. And I know that as a man sort of in and around 40 years old, the only friends that I've got that give me anything back are the ones who I can be myself with, respect, hug when I need to, break down if I need to, talk about the serious stuff as well as the football and the films. And I'm just trying to have conversations with these 13, 14, 15-year-old boys that I know that I would really have benefited from when I was their age. And they seem to enjoy it and seem to understand how important it is.
I think a great point you bring up there is about actually finding those specific friends. It doesn't have to be all your friends that you can open up to. I know that going back about 15 years, like I would talk quite openly with people about my mental health struggles, and I don't think people were ready for it about 15 years ago. However, things have shifted quite significantly over the last few
Yeah.
years, and it is now more of a topic of conversation that adults, and especially men, are quite open to have, and I think that's been really, really helpful. And it's just basically nurturing that within the younger generation now and basically say to them, look, okay, the older generation now have caught up and we are talking very openly about it, and actually we're not finished. So what kind of like approaches and activities do you use to in order to kind of bring that message out of for the young people?
I think sometimes it's trying to get them to acknowledge that there might be something that you're fearful of, or something that you're scared about, um, or something that you maybe don't talk about as much as you should, that actually most of your friends are also thinking about or also scared of. So the activity of tell me something that you're scared of. Some of the things which come out of that conversation are really, really powerful, whether it's heights and spiders, which is often how that starts, or whether it is, the fear of failure, the fear of girls, the fear of, or how to communicate with girls, the fear of your sexuality, the fear of just not understanding what your identity is, and not knowing who you are, is is quite an interesting place to start, as well as what other things do I do in a workshop. So things along the lines of, what do you find easy about being a boy? What do you find hard about being a boy? Often a lot of those things will come out, and there'll almost be a sense of that community spirit and that companionship in that room, of actually where lads who primarily 90% of their friendships revolve around banter. So we have a talk about how, okay, you know, at which point do you think in your life or a friend's life might you have to draw the line between banter and having a serious conversation? And how might that go? What might you ask a friend? It might just be the most important thing that you ask somebody else, to ask how they're doing. And unfortunately, when we're talking about, the darker but very realistic side of this conversation about what can happen with men and anyone, but mainly men, as the statistics constantly back up, as to how bad life can get, and what steps men take when it gets too hard to handle. Boys tend to relate to that because they either know someone, or they know of someone, or they've read about a celebrity or an athlete that they know who's gone through these dark times in their lives, and they actually resonate with that. And I think if you can set a safe environment in a room where they understand it's safe, everyone's on the same side, particularly if you've got a slightly smaller group than what a normal class size would be. Maybe you've got 8, 12, 15 boys in a room. If you can set that standard of safety, then they will start to open up about things, and it can be really, really uplifting, and really quite impactful and meaningful in terms of what they will feel that they can talk about.
Yeah, the environment's everything, especially when it comes to safeguarding. It's I spoke recently on a podcast where we spoke about how in workplaces they'll bring in these kind of like chill out rooms, places with like foosball and computer games, and they'll also bring in things like they'll put gyms in there. They're trying to make the environment comfortable so that people are more productive. And so when it comes to actually working with young lads and actually going, okay, that this is an open space, this is, let's enable you to be able to open up. I suppose to start off with, the room needs to be something where they feel comfortable. It's not formal. It's not sitting around desks, I suppose. It needs to be something that's
Yeah.
slightly informal approach. And also maybe chucking in a few questions. I'm just thinking this off the top of my head, where you think, right, they'll just chuck out some safe answers. Like, for example, when you asked about
Yeah.
the fears, they go spiders and heights. I mean, to be honest with you, that one's slightly safer when you're around your mates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find then that once you've got that environment sorted, you've started off with some easier questions for them, do they really feel confident to be incredibly open in front of their peers after that?
Yes, I think it often requires a few things. Like, something that I set up is I've got a kind of a course, a program, if you like, that I'm constantly amending, and it's constantly evolving, and called All to Play For, which is basically a 3 or 6 sort of lesson program, if you like, where we talk about all the aspects of what it is to be a boy in as much detail as we can, dependent on school timetables and whatever other restrictions are in place. So I might see a group of, say, 10 boys, I don't know, 3 times over 3 sessions, or 2 full mornings, however it works. It's different in every school and every environment, but it's often not until the second session, or the second half of the first session, where they actually start to realize, hang on, I think this guy might be on my side. He just actually wants me to be myself, talk about what's good, talk about what's challenging, and talk about the kind of man I want to be. And so I'm actually, now that I've sussed him out a little bit, I'm going to try and engage with that and see what I can get out of it, because I feel like he's genuinely here because he wants me to be myself and be authentic, and to actually feel good about myself. So that's the environment that I try to create. And whilst doing so, I think not being a teacher, whereas that often with the case of many external visitors in school, they might try and play you and suss you out a bit to begin with. That's fine. I've had 10 years of getting used to that. That's okay. And not every lesson will be fantastic and life changing. I have to acknowledge that as I go as well. But also, I think I am able to almost find a place somewhere between professionalism and vulnerability where I can actually be very open about my flaws and my fears and my failures and my doubts. And I think that helps them to resonate with me as a real human being.
So how do you know when a session has been successful, and what is your actual personal hope and desire when you work with a school? What is it that you really want to get out of it once you've finished the course?
So I think I'll try and answer that in two different ways. So one of the trickiest aspects of what I do is that, I mean, I could go in and do an assembly to a whole year group and followed by some workshops. So I see every boy or sometimes every young person in that year group, a carousel day, a drop down day, PSHE day, whatever it is. But if I am going in there to talk to some selected pupils, it's very difficult and it's very important to establish that I am there because I am sort of with them and I'm on their side from the start, because they think automatically, oh well, this guy's coming to talk about us because I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing other lads who maybe have had some issues around behaviour and around that sort of thing. So I immediately have to put that to rest and just say, look, you're here because I don't know any of you, but what I hear, you've got pretty strong personalities, and therefore you can be role models to other people in your year group, the year group below. You guys have got some social clout, so let's talk about how we can present ourselves really well. And I think sometimes they'll be really, really standoffish to begin with. But I was recently in a school, an academy school in Northumberland, close to where I live, and I was actually doing some of those programs with a small group of year 8, year 9 boys, and another lad came up to me, and I had to sort of remind myself of where I knew this face from because he wasn't in my current group, and I go into a lot of schools, and he basically just fist pumped me and said, "Ben, great to see," and I had to remind myself that, well, obviously I know you from this school when I did the same group last year. And that is how much that he remembered and got out of spending 4 or 5 hours, not with me necessarily, but with the message that I had for him when I came in a year previously, because that's how much he enjoyed just being listened to, being respected, in a room where there was safety, there was empathy, there was care, and there was a listening ear for someone to just engage with him. And I just want to be absolutely clear that none of this that I'm saying is to come across negatively on teachers, because they've got a job to do. They're teachers. I could not do what they do. I am in awe of teachers. I am married to a teacher, but my position is a little bit different when I go into schools. So I try and enable the young people to sort of get on board with that, and not sort of see it as a get out of lesson, sort of get out of jail free card, but just a real opportunity for them to explore who they are as young men and to try and look a bit deeper into who they are and how they can positively impact their peers and the world around them.
From someone who's worked in inclusion and safeguarding and pastoral support for a number of years, the service that you provide is invaluable when it comes to schools. And it's worth saying that the reason why I got in contact with you and asked you to join me on today's episode is because I saw the work that you were doing through LinkedIn and the messaging you were putting out there, your feedback from sessions that you've taken, especially when they write the notes, the posted notes. That is so powerful because that is their voice. You can see it's written by the kids,
Yeah,
and some of the things they're coming out with are so profound as well. And so I see the service you're providing is absolutely necessary at the moment, and will be long into the future. It's in some ways, it's like with safeguarding. You wish you'd never did, you wouldn't have to provide the service that you do, but I enjoy the service that I provide, and I can see the difference it's making, and obviously you can see the difference it's making for you. And I'm glad we haven't actually mentioned the specific names of some of the negative influences because I don't really want to give them the airtime.
yeah,
But you are now a role model, and you're kind of like showing to young people that they can be role models. You don't have to be someone who has loads and loads of money or a platform. The fact is that you can just be a role model to people around you. So if somebody wants to learn more about your services, how may they go about doing this?
I guess just as simple as checking out Worth Educating on LinkedIn or Instagram. Yeah, wortheducating.org is my website, and just to, like what you've just said there, I think the best way of kind of getting a way into how I do things and why I do them is based on the, I guess sometimes the impact of the feedback from the young people. I think it's all there, and it's nothing necessarily I'm doing as a person other than being there and showing up as my true self, um, as someone who's really trying very hard to model sort of modern day masculinity, which might not be for everyone, but it's something which enables me to sort of delve into myself and who I am, and to be a good friend, dad, husband. And I used to get really, really overwhelmed by the necessity to come up with some really in-depth feedback. So I come up with all of these forms. But what I do now is I just say to the lads, look, I've spent an hour with you. If you've done that autoplay full course, you've maybe spent 3 or 4 hours with me. What have you got out of this? What have you found helpful? And what is healthy masculinity to you? And you like you say, you get some profound answers. And I just facilitate the conversations. The hard work is done by the young boys who attend these sessions.
Absolutely. Well done for all the work you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us today. This it's been really interesting hearing your approach, and your passion for what you do comes through quite evidently. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Chris. Really good talking to you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.